I think I made a mistake by posting late last night the wonderful video of the mules going up with the army to the remote villages in the Atlas. It happened late at night and I got responses all through the night, which didn't actually help my sleep, but never mind. That's the price you pay for making a mistake. But what did strike me very much from the responses I got, and I appreciate all of them, and I must say that if it wasn't for the people in the West supporting us in the way they have done, we would not have made the progress we have in terms of the growth of the refuge and the impact that I think we have had in many areas. However, when a disaster happens, like the earthquake, it struck me from the responses that although we live in a world which is global and we all have access to the internet and we all feel we know what is going on in all parts of the world, it is amazing how culturally diverse we still all are. And I want to say at the outset in favour of Morocco, their efforts and the efforts of the army have been magnificent in terms of assisting people who were very difficult to reach. Those mules are just an example, but there have been other things as well. I also want to say, before I go any further, is that donkeys and mules are treated well in the mountains and in the countryside. They are part of life, they're working animals. The humans and the equines are interdependent on each other. The problems occur further north when they come into the cities and there is exploitation, and that happens in every country. A little thing about working mules, just a bit of information. If you look at the comments that were made on the post I did, Ellen Cochrane said, "What a wonderful footage." Now, Ellen, her mule was an international champion. She has done more than anyone to promote the issue of mules, mule behaviour and how mules should be treated. She is a grandmaster and she has worked in the High Atlas and she has worked with the muleteers in the High Atlas. Now, a wee bit of history. My grandfather in the First World War, both my grandfathers in the First World War were in the trenches and the land between the trenches, and the British Army took over horses from farms, and when they'd exhausted the horses, they took over mules from the UK. And a lot of people in the army couldn't work with mules. They said they were stubborn, they were difficult. They're not stubborn or difficult, they're just highly intelligent. And the muleteers who did work with those mules during the war, when they came back after 1918, those people suffered far less from what we now know as PTSD, because they had forged such a close relationship with their animals that was mutually beneficial. And that really is something very powerful that people will develop working with mules. They are incredibly strong. The mules here and the mules that went to war, you will find that their mother is a horse and their father is a donkey. They inherit the power of the horse, the intelligence of the donkey. It's multiplied because they're a crossbreed, they're a mongrel. And they are the most amazing animals. The animals you saw last night going up to the High Atlas will all have been well cared for. I, in fact, was asked if I could send Tosca, our mule here, who used to be a lead mule in the High Atlas, but is retired here. And she's very fit and she would have known what to do. But I said she's now too fat. She isn't fit enough to do it. And the team of mules that they put together, in my view, were magnificent and they were well looked after. So for the people in the West who will say you shouldn't use animals at all, it's exploitation when they use for the benefit of humans, two things. Firstly, if those people had not got tents when those mules took them up, there was no way of getting tents there. They couldn't drop them from a helicopter and they couldn't send a vehicle. Babies would have died, young children would have died. Those mules work with humans, and I promise you they would value what they did. And if you watch the film carefully and you saw the teams as they were approaching the village, how the villagers were all behind them singing, and they were singing in Berber out of respect for the mules. The mules were saving their lives. And if we get too judgmental, I'm quite interested to look back during my lifetime. I can remember animals working on the Liverpool Docks very much in the same way that they worked in Morocco now. But more importantly, as I was older and a young adult, I remember pit ponies being taken down the pits. I did a lot of work with miners. And I promise you, those pit ponies went down into the dark in cages, upright, like that. Their front hooves, and they were upright, and they were dropped down into the pits. Some of them only came up for a week or 2 weeks a year. Where was the animal welfare then? Who was shouting about it at the time? Because when I was a young woman, I don't remember it. You see, we're quite protected in the West. We go into supermarkets and we see lamb chops. I know there are a lot of vegans and I support you hugely, but we see lamb chops. We don't think where those lamb chops came from or how those animals were slaughtered. So please, please don't be too judgmental of Morocco. Morocco has never treated his animals in the way that some animals were treated in Victorian Britain and certainly during my lifetime. So it's not a question of getting the government to understand. We have a very proud, able, capable government and a proud king, and they react to the cultural norms of the day. Things are changing because generally it's being accepted that these working animals should be allowed to retire. And I think we've had a good deal to do with that. Things are changing, that in Islamic country, they are agreeing that we should castrate the donkeys. And how do I deal with that? That isn't permitted in a lot of Islamic countries. I mean, I will say quite openly to my boys, if you all practice birth control in Morocco and you go to the pharmacy, we're doing exactly the same with the donkeys. And things are changing, but it has to be done from within, and it has to be done with a full understanding of the culture. I think what those mules did yesterday was magnificent. It was also mentioned as to why, and I think in good faith, it wasn't particularly meant as a criticism, but it was mentioned, why were the men not carrying haversacks? They had no need to carry haversacks for this reason. I've discovered since that food and medicines were dropped from helicopters. The purpose of that trek was to take the tents because they desperately needed shelter, and the men could not carry tents themselves on the backs. And if they had carried anything on the back, it hinders them in very stony mountainous ground, where in fact mules are far more able, they can cope with the terrain far better. And I did mention to somebody, it's a good sign there were no haversacks because they weren't going to stay there. The mules came straight down, they would go into stables and they would be fed and watered. So please, when you watch these videos, it is right you see them. I want you to know about Morocco. I want you to understand Morocco, but don't jump to too many conclusions. Think it through and think about what happened and happens now in your own country. I try to answer every question because that's what we try to do. But would you bear with me a little while? Because while I'm answering questions that take time, I'm not out there organising the food deliveries. So I think when all this is over, is the time for a really, really good debate. Thank you for listening, and I hope you understand that I remain firmly committed to animal welfare, but I had no problems with the work that those mules undertook yesterday. Bye for now.